Hi, welcome, come on in. My name is Katie, it's so nice to have you here. And I'm assuming if you found your way to my itty bitty booktube channel in the corner of the internet, you must know Books and Lala. Kayla, the undisputed queen of booktube, long may she reign. Every year in January, Kayla does a reading project where she reads BookTuber's favourite books. And in order to select the booktubers that she gets recommendations from, she goes through and finds people with similar reading tastes to her. Kayla and I have an awful lot in common, probably more than you might think. We're both born in 1990, we both have been on YouTube for more than 10 years, both started channels in completely different niches before finding our way to BookTube. We both have 5-letter names and we share 3 of those 5 letters. We are both also parents to very athletic, adorable children. I'm sorry, I couldn't help myself. We both read pretty widely, but I think the most important thing is that we both look incredible in pink. Having said all of that, Kayla and I do have very different reading tastes, and I have never been featured on BookTuber's Favorites. So last year I did my own little reading project, didn't I, of reading a bunch of Kayla's favorite books in hopes that I would end up with a bunch of her favorites, and then she would pick me to be on BookTuber's Favorites. And while the ultimate goal of getting on BookTuber's Favorites did not work, I did have a really good time. I ended up finding 2 of my favorite books of the year in that reading project. And also, it was a lot of fun. So, of course, I'm back to do it again for 2024. So I have scoured my extensive library and come up with 6 books that I already own that Kayla has given 5 stars to that I think I have a pretty good shot of loving too. Now, some of these I do feel more confident going into that I'm going to like than others, but I feel like amongst these I have a very strong chance of finding several books that I really like, and I'm keeping my fingers crossed for a favourite or 2. And who knows, maybe at long last I might finally achieve my goal this year of getting onto BookTuber's Favorites. I'm not going to lie to you, this has not been my best reading year. I feel like a lot of people are saying that, but where I would normally have by this time in the year 12 or 15 books that I love that I've got to kind of narrow down to a top 10, this year sort of feels like slim pickings. I feel like I've maybe got 6 or 7 favorites of the year, and then I'm not really sure what's going to be filling out the rest of that list. So aside from me essentially trying to cheat my way into Kayla's video, I also just am really hoping for a favorite or 2 in this video because I need it. So with that, I'm going to get to reading.
This is a book of connected short stories. It kicks off with an ancient plague being unleashed upon the world from the Arctic. And the stories go throughout the following many decades, following different people, and just a little peek in at humanity and how people respond to tragedy and grief. It has a pretty small cast. It's very intimate stories, and I love how you find out that they're all connected.
So I've finished our first book of the video, and it is How High We Go in the Dark by Sequoia Nagamatsu. I would describe this as kind of like a literary science fiction novel. It kind of feels more like a collection of short stories that we find out are very much interconnected. And speculative interconnected short stories is something that I have a track record of liking a lot. So I don't mind admitting to you that I definitely had high hopes going into this. But firstly, I feel like I need to talk to you about the framing of this novel. Basically, it starts in our near future in the early 2030s. And the first character we're getting to know is basically traveling to Siberia because basically like there's been a bunch of melting. So unusual things are being uncovered for the first time in millennia. And one of the things that's uncovered is a body of a girl with some like unusual markings and stuff, and also with a pathogen we have no idea what it is. And I'm sure you don't need me to tell you, but this pathogen quickly becomes a plague. So in that very first short story, we get a glimpse into how this pandemic has started. And in the next story, we kind of jump forward like a year or 2. And that's kind of how the book continues. Like we kind of jump forward a couple of years, sometimes a bit further in time, and just kind of see like what's going on, where the pandemic's at, how people are coping with mass death, what other issues are affecting people. Some of the stories are like buck wild sci-fi. Others feel almost more like thought experiments. Others are much more grounded. And as such, obviously, some of these stories worked for me much better than others did. I would say, especially some of the earlier stories, I was just in love with this book. The way that everything feels so small and intimate, like I said, the way that the writing, it's just beautiful. It manages to capture so much like heartache, but also absurdity of the situation. It's really, really well done. There were a couple of stories in here that like, in retrospect, I appreciate a lot. But while reading, like literally made me ill, like literally made me feel nauseous. In particular, there was one story about basically like this amusement park that is used to euthanize sick children in like a happy way. It's just, oh my God, just even thinking about it, like that whole concept I will literally have nightmares about that amusement park and be thinking about that amusement park until the day I die. And there's multiple stories like that. The ones that kind of almost feel Black Mirror-esque, but with so much more nuance and like grace and elegance and subtlety, with like humanity at the center of it, personal experiences, people at the center of it. I feel like this is just going to be one of those books that I think about and talk about pretty regularly. You know what I mean? Having said that, I don't know that I could call this a new favorite. I don't think I loved it in the same way that Kayla did. I feel like this is the tricky part of this video, is like, not only do I have to like and enjoy a book, like I'm thinking about whether it's going to be a favorite of the year. Like, that's the context. It's a lot. It's a lot of pressure to put on a little book, and I want to make it clear I did like it a lot. But I think there were a handful of the stories that just went off the deep end a little bit too much for me, or some of the stories where like the scale just got a little bit bigger than I think I wanted from these stories. So a powerful read that is going to stay with me for sure, but not necessarily what we're looking for in this video, which is a favorite of the year. For that, we are just going to have to keep searching, which means I have some more reading to do.
So Death is like a real person, and she's basically the most like unseen in society, and death throughout the ages has been like depicted in fiction as a man, and so she talks all about that, and she's just like a real person who's like going to therapy, and her therapist is like, you're catastrophizing everything. And I think the way that death is embodied is just like how so many of us feel.
Hello friends, we're out on a little afternoon walk. The birds are chirping and I have a book to talk to you about. I decided to read Mrs. Death, which is a book I bought a little while ago secondhand. It's definitely an unusual book. It's a very poetic book, and as the title suggests, we're literally talking about death for pretty much the entire time. Death is literally personified in this book as an old black woman. The kind of person who is just forgotten and ignored by society is the way that it's described to us. We have another character though, who basically like meets death on the night that the Grenfell Towers burned down. Essentially they were living there as a young child with their mum, and their mum does die. Death takes her. And so this book kind of alternates from us learning more about this character, especially as they're a little bit older and they're living in like some level of poverty, striving to be a writer, while also feeling really connected to the character Mrs. Death and kind of wanting to write down Mrs. Death's story. But then it's also interspersed with like historical deaths, people like literally from our real world that have died and in particular circumstances. All the while, like I said, this is very poetic, and there's like a repetitive nature to the writing itself, which is deliberate. It was a very tender portrayal of like a new personification of death that I thought was brilliantly done. Hello, how are you?
Very good.
Hello.
So friendly.
Oh, it's good to see you. Hello. Bye, have a good day. I can't quite remember where I was up to now, but that was a nice interruption. I suppose my reading of this book had less to do with like the character of death being like a literal personification, and more about this other character and their proximity to death, and kind of what empathy and proximity to grief and loss does to a human mind. I think obviously losing somebody in such a traumatic, horrible, like unjust kind of way in and of itself is just such a pivotal moment in somebody's life. But then also the way our character wants to tell the story of just so many deaths and is almost like reliving these deaths. But there's kind of like literally a limit to our ability to imagine other people's suffering, whether that's because it can like literally break us, I think, on like a soul mental kind of level, or in the way that like truly trying to conceptualize so much suffering is literally just consuming. And I don't know, I suppose that's just something I really like identified with, and that's part of the book that I found in a way the most grounded, because this book is a little bit weird and a little bit mystical, a little bit like spiritual almost in a way. Now we're on to the question of the video, the question that is always quite hard to answer. Obviously, I really enjoyed this book. Is it a new favourite? I don't know. I really don't know. When I finished it, it kind of felt like a 4-star, but I'm wondering if it kind of is one of those 4 stars for me that just lingers and grows. You might remember that last year, my favourite book of the year, I gave a 4-star initially to, and yet I couldn't stop thinking about it. And by the end of the year, it was my favourite book. And I don't know if that's going to happen to Mrs. Death, but it feels like the kind of book that might happen to. I'm not exactly sure what book we're going to be reading next, but I have high hopes. So far this video is going very well. I mean, not sure I found a new favourite, but I'm really liking the books that we're reading. So I'll take it. I will take that. But anyway, I'll see you soon.
My number one favorite book of the year. There's no way that you don't know what this is because I won't shut up about it. I'm the number one Middlegame supporter, and I will be talking about this every day of my life.
Come on, little Ollie. Good girl. Hello, friends. Ollie and I have come out here to talk to you about another book. Ollie, what you doing? Do you want to come up here? The book is in the way. How rude. To be perfectly honest, I suppose I knew in my bones, about 80 pages in, 100 pages in, that this was just not going to be the book for me. It's kind of like a sci fantasy, but it's pretty contemporary. Basically, we're introduced at the beginning of the book to twins, Roger and Dodger, who are separated at birth. Slowly over the course of the book, we're also introduced to the idea of alchemy and like the magic in this world, and how basically we have like this super evil scientist who is trying to like control the universe, and he thinks that he can kind of like place all of the knowledge of the universe into two human bodies that he can then control. And so basically that's kind of what Roger and Dodger are. One of them has all of the knowledge of like language, and the other has all of the knowledge of like maths and science. But they've been separated at birth and they're growing up in two very different kind of like adoptive families. But they can also kind of communicate with each other, like telepathically. I've heard people say that this book is confusing. Like, I remember watching vlogs when this book first came out and people were just like, I have no idea what's happening. This is so confusing. And I didn't find it confusing at all. And I know that I'm far from a particularly intelligent person. I don't know if maybe it's just because once you read a certain amount of fantasy books, like it just gets easier. I don't know. But I suppose I just wanted to add that if you've been wanting to read this book, but you've been intimidated because you thought it would be like just really confusing, I don't think it is. In fact, I found this very quick and easy to read. And I suppose that lack of confusion it nudged up against predictability, at least for me. That is not to say that I knew every single detail of how this book would pan out, but I kind of like got the gist. By about 120 pages in, I kind of got what was happening, you know? It seems to me that the people who love this book tend to cite the primary reason being their love for Roger and Dodger and their relationship. And for whatever reason, that just didn't happen for me. So this book was fine. It was totally, completely fine. So a favourite we have still yet to find in this video. I think this would definitely be my least favourite so far. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed, and I suppose I have some more reading to do.
It's general fiction with a little bit of weirdness. We're following two women who knew each other back in school. They have a little bit of a tumultuous relationship. And one of them has these stepkids who are just moving in with her. She is unprepared to deal with them and their spontaneous combustion. So she invites her friend to come live with them and care for these children. It's kind of a soft found family about this woman making these children feel safe, but also finding a space and a purpose for herself. More than anything though, it's funny.
You can't look at me like that when I'm trying to film. Blair and I are out at brunch, and I just had to tell you about the latest book that I've read because I think we might have finally found a winner. I read Kevin Wilson's, wait, what's it called? Do you remember? Nothing to See Here. Yeah. I read Nothing to See Here by Kevin Wilson, and it was just a delight. I don't know that I could describe this as like an all-time favourite book, but it was just a wonderful read, and I loved it. I just loved it. The premise is essentially it's about kids that spontaneously combust. They catch on fire, which obviously is absurd. And in so many ways, this book is a little bit absurd. It's also, though, about the woman that takes care of them and the relationship that she has with another woman. So it is also exploring concepts of like class and politics and gender roles. But at the heart of it are these kids. And I think it's not like a perfect book by any means, but like I said, it's just delightful. And the way that I think it is an allegory for just like difference. I think it was very easy to read it as an allegory for like neurodivergence, but I think it could be read as an allegory for any kind of difference or disability. And essentially it's just about how everybody, especially kids, just need to be accepted and loved. Like, it was so sweet, but it was also literally laugh out loud funny. Thank you. Breakfast is here, so I better wrap this up. But I just wanted to add that I really liked how all of the characters were messy and flawed and so distinct from one another. Like, I loved the voice of especially our main character, our narrator. And I don't know if this will be a book that I will continue to think about for years to come, but it is a book that I absolutely loved the experience of reading. Will it make my favourites of the year list? I think it has a pretty good chance. Like I've said, and I'm not having like the greatest reading year of all time. So there's definitely some room on that list. And this book might just make it. But anyway, I'm going to go eat my breakfast and then get back to reading when we get home. Hi, Editing Katey here. I don't think I've ever done one of these, but I have been searching high and low for a clip of Kayla talking about Addie LaRue, literally hours, and I can't find it. The closest I have come is finding links to several privated videos, and I know Kayla likes to private her videos to keep her like library of videos curated. But like, girl, you're not making my job very easy right now. So unfortunately, all we have to go on is our 5-star, oh shit, GoodReads review. Serves me right for not checking before I just started reading, I guess. I need to be so real with you right now. I have been meaning to film this clip all day, and it's now 7 p.m. because I've been putting it off for that long. Because I know that this is a well-beloved book, and I don't know, it's fucking huge. It's like 550 pages. Can we sit it up here? Make it look like an advertisement? Obviously, people fucking love this book, and I don't want to yuck people's yum. I know you all think I'm just like some massive hater, but like, I'm a lover, truly at my heart. I'm just a lover with a lot of opinions. And I don't hate this book. Honestly, I think it would be easier for me to talk about if I hated it, but I actually really enjoyed reading it. Like, if I were to describe to you like the perfect book for me, I think Addie LaRue on paper would check an awful lot of those boxes. I'm talking like a low fantasy or speculative element. I'm talking character-centered. I'm talking slow, almost no plot. Beautiful writing, atmospheric, maybe preferably even with like an historical setting. A book exploring grand, big themes like mortality and what it means to be alive, the purpose of life. All of that and more can be found in Addie LaRue. I found it like restful to read. Maybe that's the best word. Like, I was looking forward to picking it up, and every time I picked it up, I like felt relaxed. I felt interested and intrigued enough, but not stressed out. Like, I just liked reading this. This book is so big that I'm sure you probably know at least something about it, even if you haven't read, but I'll just give you a brief, very brief gist. In the early 1700s, we are introduced to a girl named Addie who is living in like a rural town in France. We meet her kind of like in her early 20s, essentially when she's expected to settle down and get married, but she really doesn't want to. She doesn't want to be born, live and die in the same silly small town. You know, she's got big dreams. She's a big dreamer, our Addie. And then one day, to basically get out of this kind of like arranged marriage, she makes a deal with the devil. It's a Faustian story, essentially. So basically, Addie thinks that she's getting a deal for essentially her freedom, but obviously things are a little bit more complicated than that. And we soon discover that how this freedom manifests is that she will like live forever, essentially, more or less. And basically people forget her. The second they're not looking at her, the second they've moved away from her, they forget they ever met her, that she ever existed. So a really cool concept, a really powerful setup. I think the major issues I had with this book were, one, I think it would have been way more powerful, way more impactful if it was told in a chronological way rather than floating back and forth between the past and the present. Even though I really liked that as a narrative device, I don't think it worked very well here. One, because there were so many scenes, especially in the past timeline, that were essentially repetitions. They might be slightly different scenarios, but they were essentially saying and doing and achieving the same thing over and over and over again. I think too, there were some things that we learned, like these reveals and plot beats throughout the book, that would have just been way more impactful if we had met Addie at that time, like if we had followed along chronologically. Another criticism that I've heard time and time again about this book, and it's true, the rumors are true, folks, is that this book is hugely white and Eurocentric. Like, if white feminism was a book, it would be this one. But even if we're not talking about like the morality or the kind of like political implications, even just for the character of Addie, and I suppose this all ties up with another one of my criticisms, is that Addie is a terrible protagonist. Like, there's nothing to her. She's hot and she's stubborn. I think those are literally the only attributes that we see on page. We're told at the beginning that she's adventurous, that she's curious, that she wants to travel. She can't wait to see the whole world. And yet this woman spends most of her 300 years in France, a little bit in Italy, a little bit in the UK, and then in America. I think that's it. I think that's literally it. And so when we're told that we're following an adventurous, curious spirit who just needs to be free, and then we watch as she spends 300 years at home in Europe and then like hopping over to America, like, I just don't believe you, V.E. Schwab. I don't believe that you've written an adventurous, curious spirit, you know? Like the fact that Addie is literally the same person after 300 years. She's literally the same person. There's nothing different about her. And like, how? How have you been alive for 300 years and been through everything that you've been through and you're the same person? You're stubborn, a little bit spiteful, and you're hot. Like, that's it. So I'm aware I sound very negative about this, and I want to be clear that that is in part because I'm frustrated by how shallow this book is, but also I'm frustrated by how much potential there was and how much I liked it despite that, and how much I can see I would have loved it if there was more to this. The writing was great, the atmosphere was great, but that's kind of all there was. I really feel like I'm talking about the Starless Sea all over again. I'm so happy it worked for Kayla. I'm so happy this book worked for so many people. I love it when people find a book they love. That makes me happy. I don't get it though. I don't get it. I don't feel the same way. Absolutely not. This book will not be making it to my favourites list. I am sad I didn't love it, but this is not the last book of the video, so not all hope is lost. Not to put too much pressure on the next book or anything.
And it was really fun. I feel like everything in here was balanced so well. The stories that we get to read, getting to know the women, Nikki and her character development, her relationship, her job, her like cultural decisions, responsibility to her family. Then we've got a little mystery. Like everything was just so well done. I can't not give this 5 stars.
Hello again. Last night I finished Erotic Stories for Punjabi Widows, and this is such a fun book. This is a book about a Punjabi community in England, and in particular we're following our main character Nikki, who is described as like a modern girl. I think she's like in her mid-20s and she's not interested in marriage. She kind of dropped out of law school. She's doing her own thing. And for a long time she's been kind of navigating that second-gen immigration experience of like wanting to respect your family and your culture while also finding your own way. So when we meet her, she's grieving the loss of her father, feeling guilty about the loss of her father, and working for not too much money at a pub, when she stumbles across an advertisement looking for a teacher to teach a couple of classes a week of like storytelling for Punjabi women. And she sees this as a great opportunity to make some more money. She also has like some vague notions of like feminism and helping women. And she definitely goes into this with some set assumptions about who these Punjabi women, particularly they're going to be older women, who they are, what they want out of life, the things that they care about. And she manages to get the job, basically because nobody else applied. But yeah, basically when she walks into that classroom, all of her assumptions are turned on their head. And it turns out these women aren't all that interested in like learning the ABCs and how to write in English. They're much more interested in telling their own fantasies and sharing stories, sexy stories. So it's just like inherently a very fun, playful, funny premise. And we do actually get these stories. Like we get the spicy stories from the widows, which is, it's fun. It's fun. I'm not going to lie. Having said all of that, this is not just a comedy. This is a book with a lot more depth, complexity, and heart to it than you might expect. We find out early on that there is this kind of like self-appointed morality police, a bunch of men within this community who are going around and like making it their business how people in the community are behaving. We also find out about a young woman who died a few years previous, who like her death is deemed a suicide, but some members in the community aren't so sure. I think my favorite thing about this book was just like watching the interactions between younger generations and older generations, and how like relationships between different generations is so enriching and empowering and important. And I loved in particular, even though I really liked Nikki, I identified with her in many ways, I loved watching her assumptions of these women be like completely deconstructed, simply because she'd never really interacted with these women before, never really spent time listening to them. I'm someone who has always had older friends, like ever since I can remember, like my first job when I was 16, my best friend at work was like a 56-year-old woman, which felt old to me at that time. Even now, 2 of my best friends are in their 60s. One's turning 70 in a couple of weeks. I'm someone who has just always really valued like having intergenerational relationships, and I consider myself hugely lucky and privileged to be able to call those people friends. And so that element of this I really, really loved. I loved getting to know these women, their own stories, their own perspectives, their own desires. Like I think the idea that is very easy to have of particularly women in conservative spaces is that they're stupid, that they don't have their own thoughts, they don't have their own desires, they don't have their own opinions, which is just like, it's not true. It's not not true. That is not to say that I liked all of these women, far from it, but I enjoyed watching those intergenerational relationships and the dynamics. And I think the way that the author kind of brought together like the lightness, the fun, the playfulness with the kind of harder hitting elements of this book were pretty well done. It didn't sort of feel jarring when you moved from like laughing out loud to crying. It just felt honest, I guess. And I really liked it. I liked it a lot. And I would like to leave it there, but obviously the framing of this video means I need to talk about whether it's a favorite of the year. And I don't know. I don't know that this book quite crosses that line, but did I love reading it? Absolutely. Am I glad? So glad that I finally got around to it? Absolutely. Would I recommend it? Yes, I would. I liked it a lot. Obviously, unlike last year, we're not ending this video with like, I definitely have found a top 10 favorite book of the year. But I do have to say that I think two of these have a chance. I'm definitely going to have to go over like the 100 or so books that I have read this year and have a little bit of a think. Do a bit of soul searching, maybe a bit of rereading. Because this is my last video of 2024. And my first video of the year will hopefully, if all things go well, be my favorite books of 2024 video. So I've got a little bit of time. I've got a week where I can like really suss this out and think about it. Whether you have watched every single one of my videos this year or this is your first one, thank you so much for spending some time with me in 2024. I really hope you enjoyed your time as much as I did. As always, a big thank you to my patrons over on Patreon, and especially big thank you to Livia, Lynette Brown, and Marie. But that is it from me, folks. Happy New Year. I'll see you in 2025. Until then, happy reading and so much love. Bye.